Now, into chapter 2. So, when you think about your spiritual teachers and these holy people, don't you imagine that they're going to be compassionate and loving? And when you come to them in that situation, they're just going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry. What can I do to help? I mean, this is really a tough situation." That's what a lot of people think is going to happen. But let's see what happens. So Sanjaya said, "To him who was overcome by self-pity and despair, whose downcast eyes were filled with tears, Krishna spoke these words. From whence has this weakness come to you at this difficult time? It is not befitting you who are of noble character. It does not lead to the state of spiritual fulfillment and can only cause disgrace. Yield not to this immature behavior. It is not suitable for you. Abandon the show of weakness and faint-heartedness. Stand up, Arjuna." So, you're expecting this compassion. What does Krishna say? He says, knock it off. Get up. This is not for you. You are of noble birth, of noble character. And this is something we have to remember, because Krishna represents infinite supreme consciousness, which means he knows what's going on. And if he can look at Arjuna, and we are all Arjuna, and he can say, you are of noble birth, it's essentially pointing out that you are not meant to remain mired in this muck of small-mindedness. You have the capacity to realize amazing things, not because of some egotistical, self-aggrandizement, but just because you are worth it. You are worthy. You are a part of me. You are a part of the infinite consciousness. So that's why Krishna behaves this way, because there's no need to pander to someone who just wants to be caught up in self-pity, because if you do that, they're just going to stay that way. So Arjuna spoke. "O Krishna, how can I kill Bhishma and Drona? So how can I eliminate my sense of independent existence along with memories and habits?" I mean, really, think about it. All that is required for you to succeed on your spiritual path is to get rid of your sense of independent existence and quit binding yourself to memories and habits. That's it. I mean, it's easier said than done, right? But that's really it. How can I fight with my skills against these two venerable beings? So how can I fight against these two long-standing conditions? And that's what it is. It's just you've been so identified as a small person. You've lived your life based on your habits and your tendencies that it seems absolutely impossible. It's like when you grow up and you realize your dad is just another person. When you're a kid, you think, oh, I can't do anything. He knows everything. He's stronger than me. It's always going to be that way. And then one day you grow up and you think, well, he's a person too. He has his own issues. And now I'm an adult and we're sort of on equal footing here. So you have to let go of that. And it's the same thing with the spiritual path. Indeed, rather than to slay these noble teachers, it would be preferable for me to be a beggar. Having slain the teachers with desire for personal gain, I would only enjoy on earth delights tainted by my actions. Anyway, he goes on in the same way. And then verse 9 says, thus having addressed Krishna, Arjuna proclaimed, I will not fight. Having spoken, he was silent. And just above that, he does say, I implore you, correct me, teach me, tell me for certain what is the better way. I am your pupil. I seek refuge in your guidance. And Roy's commentary says, now, however, there is hope. The devotee, weary of fruitless mental quandary, surrenders and asks for help in the form of right knowledge while admitting that no solution has thus far been found. So Roy points out in his commentary that when Arjuna says, I implore you, correct me, teach me, tell me for certain which is the better way, I am your pupil. Roy is saying, you or us as the spiritual seeker recognize we don't really know what to do at this point in time. But we obviously know someone or some tradition which has a methodology and a practice and a way, and we see that that's possible. We might not understand it, but we're willing to ask, what do I do here? So there is hope, because rather than saying, I give up, what's the point? This is stupid. The person says, I'm sad, I don't get it, but maybe you can help me. And that's a good change. And then, having spoken, he was silent. And Roy writes, the devotee, though still somewhat self-consciously willful and resistant to the earlier invitation to engage in righteous action, finally does the right thing and decides to be quiet. Mental stillness and receptivity to learning are necessary conditions if the way of discipleship is to be apprehended and lived. So again, this is where it's a fine line being in a kind of a teacher-student relationship, because in the beginning we are willful. We think we want to do it our way, and if we know someone who has succeeded in it, my experience has been to forget about. So if I'm in a situation and I'm interacting with someone who has achieved a goal that I want to achieve, I'm not going to go up to that person and say, well, can we do it this way? Should we do it that way? But what about this? I'm going to go up to them and I'm going to say, what do I do? And they're going to tell me, you do A, B, and C. And I might not agree, but I think to myself, they've been successful, so I don't care what I think. I'm just going to do A, B, and C. And then it tends to work out. And one other situation about this, when it comes to having a spiritual teacher, I personally, this is only because this is the way I did it, I don't recommend having 20 different teachers. And that's because there can be different, like perspectives or different emphasis between teachers, even amongst the lineage here. Like teachers from Sri Yukteswar's branch, so Yogananda's brother disciples, and even Roy has a few students that teach things very different than I do, but we all have the same, source. And the reason you don't want to be doing that, because it's as if you imagine you're going to the top of a mountain, and there are all these paths going to the top of the mountain, and some of the paths are close together, which means while you're over here going to the top of the mountain and someone else is over here going to the top of the mountain, you might hear their conversation and they start talking about this boulder that they've just crossed or this obstacle that they've had to overcome. And you hear it and you think, well, I didn't have to do that. Or someone had told them that there's a pit of snakes up there. And now you hear that, and you're like, oh, well, but you're not on the same path. You're not on the same route up the mountain, which means that if you're listening to other sources, you're going to be hearing things that might not be applicable to your specific approach. Do you understand what I'm saying? It doesn't mean they're invalid. I mean, some of them might be, but it doesn't mean they're invalid. It just means that you need to focus on the path that you're on and listen to the guides that have already walked that path. And if you can do that, it's going to be much easier for you and you're going to be less confused and so on. When Mr. Davis met Yogananda, he told Yogananda, for the first year, read only my books. Study only my books. So when Mr. Davis became a monastic with Self-Realization Fellowship, he said he was told to read only his books by Yogananda. He found a book, I forget who the yogi was, but he was at a bookstore and he found this book by another yogi. And he started reading it. And when he went to visit Yogananda, we have to remember Yogananda is not a native English speaker. And Yogananda either caught wind or intuited it or something. And in front of all these people, Yogananda said, "It's Roy, the adulterer." And he didn't really mean like, adulterer in that regard. He meant he was adulterating things. And Yogananda said to him, "There's a reason I told you to read only my books for the first year." He said, I told you to do that. That way you became very clear in my approach, and you became very clear in the reasoning why I was directing you to practice in this way. That way, after you became very clear on that, you would understand me better. And so when we had an interaction, we would have rapport. I could speak to you, you would get it. And then after that, if you read other teachers or other ways, you would have enough discernment to know if it was actually applicable to your path, right? So it doesn't mean that you pick up a book and say, this is crap, and you just throw it away. It's that you be able to recognize, is this applicable to my path? Like the books that I recommended yesterday, those are applicable to your path. And that's why I don't recommend all these other teachers, because I've read them and I've seen important things, but most of the time they haven't been applicable to my own particular path. So this is why it is good to kind of be a little focused and concentrated in that way. But let's get back to the Gita. All right. Krishna spoke. Now, from verse 11 onward in chapter 2 of the Gita, this is the essential philosophy that you as Kriya yogis are meant to grow into. And by grow into, I mean to understand experientially. And if you're like me, when I first read the Gita, I read it so many times, and I read it, this is nice, this is great, sure. I went through it and it was uplifting, but I didn't actually take the time in the beginning to read these principles and figure out how I could integrate them into my life. So what I'm about to go through, there's a lot of them. These are the principles that you have to figure out how to make them real for you, to make this an experiential self-realization path. So Krishna spoke. You have been mourning those that need not be mourned, and yet you speak some words as if with wisdom. The wise mourn neither for the dead nor the living. Never was there a time when I was not, nor you, nor these others, and never will there be a time when we shall cease to be. As one passes through childhood, youth, and old age in the body, even so beings acquire another body. The wise person is not deluded about this. So this very first section here is essentially pointing out that you are more than the body. Mr. Davis stressed this point, Yogananda stressed this point, Sri Yukteswar, other traditions, Ramana Maharshi, even Shiva Puri Baba, who I talked about, stressed this point, that one of the biggest problems we have is thinking we are the body. We're not. And Krishna points out that beings who have a body pass through childhood, youth, and old age. And eventually they will acquire another body. The wise person is not deluded about this, which means as you grow old and change, and the things happen to your body that are natural to things that age, the wise know that that's just what the body does. So they don't get upset when this goes wrong or that goes wrong. They just know that's part of the process. I remember one Kriya yogi, he was getting a little older, and I personally have witnessed some very difficult health challenges with people I love in my life. And so I'm no stranger to heavy-duty treatments and hospitals and doctors and those kinds of things. And I've seen people move right through it. And this yogi, he was really concerned because he eats his vegetables and he practices his yoga, and he needed to have a tooth pulled. He's like, but my teeth shouldn't be falling out. He's like in his 40s and 50s. And like, like, it's okay. Like, just get your tooth pulled. And he was so upset about it. And then he just went through the process and he had his tooth pulled and his jaw felt better. And he thought, well, that wasn't so bad. So, that's a very silly example, but this is what can happen if you've really taken care of your body well, and then it starts to do things that it does as it gets older. Well, it's going to do those things. So just roll with it and find the best care you can, and don't be too concerned about it. But in this description, it is telling you very clearly the reality of life is that things are born and they die. But that is not what you are. So if you read this, you learn to contemplate, well, what am I that is beyond death? And I don't know how you're going to do that. You're going to find a way to contemplate after your meditation practice, but it is through that contemplation that you begin to understand this first primary core principle of the process. It's kind of funny what people think. We did a retreat in September for the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship students, and I was making a video like this, and my hair was down. And when my hair is down, it's really gray. And my hair is down, it's all gray and silver. And I posted a video about that, and someone commented on it. They said, well, I've heard Kriya Yoga is supposed to make you more youthful and immortal. And clearly that's not working for you. So why should I practice? So I didn't respond to that, but obviously that person did not read the Bhagavad Gita, right? So then it goes on. Material sensations of cold, heat, pleasure, or pain, and transient and impermanent, endure them while you seek knowledge. So, idea number one, you are not the body. The body, like everything else, like everything in nature, is going to grow up, grow old, die. You're going to lose it. And if you want, you'll take on other bodies. That's principle number one. Principle number two, material sensations of cold, heat, pleasure, or pain are transient and impermanent. Endure them while you seek knowledge. This sutra or this verse does not say you are going to exist in a land of unicorns and cupcakes for the rest of your life. It says cold, heat, pleasure, and pain are transient and impermanent, which means you're going to deal with those things. So what do? You endure them while you seek knowledge. This is what a yogi does. This is one of the reasons why I challenge myself in difficult ways. It's a reason why you might have seen me, a picture of me getting in a frozen tub of ice and sitting there. I mean, it's also good for your health, but when I do that because it's a very quick way of recognizing you are not your body. And even when I was younger, I loved hot showers. And these days, I'll take a hot shower for a bit, but then I turn it straight to cold. And I don't do it in the way where I'm like, it's going to be cold. What I do is I just turn it and I just feel it. And I just allow myself to recognize this is just a transient experience. And the more you do that, the less like cringy you get about things which are uncomfortable. And then that develops the ability to endure while you seek knowledge. You know, if you ever get sick, don't worry about it. The body gets sick. Just find a way to continue your practice and to remain internalized. And maybe it's even maybe it's even an opportunity to recognize you're not your body. I mean, many of the difficulties I had, injured my foot and I couldn't walk for 6 months. That really taught me to appreciate being able to walk. But it also taught me to realize that it doesn't matter if I can walk or not. I'm still what I am inside. This is an important principle, which is why I'm spending a lot of time on it. The next verse. The devotee who is not troubled by these sensations, who remains unmoved during episodes of transient displeasure or pleasure, who is wise because of being knowledgeable, becomes receptive to the realization of eternal life. We're not very far into the heart of the Gita yet, and it just told you, how do you become receptive to the realization of eternal life? It says, the devotee who is not troubled by these sensations, who remains unmoved during episodes of transient displeasure or pleasure, who is wise, becomes receptive to the realization of eternal life. Now, we don't want to take this further than it's meant to be. It doesn't mean that if difficult things are happening to you and you can prevent them or avoid them, it's okay to do that, okay? It doesn't mean that you have to pull a Ramana Maharshi and you decide to go sit in a stone chamber under a really old temple and get your legs eaten up by like rats and fleas. Like, he was in a whole other level at that point. But it doesn't mean you do that. It means when you come up against something that you can't change or prevent, the inevitable, then you just endure it with wisdom to the best of your ability, knowing that it's going to change. How you do that is going to be specific to you as an individual. I do that by doing ridiculous stuff because by doing that, it challenges me. And therefore, when an actual inevitable challenge comes up, I say to myself, you know what? I sat in 32 degrees of water for 5 minutes and I was fine. I can get through this. You know, the fellow that I work out with, one of my Kriya yoga friends said I manifested a gym guru. because he's in his 70s, he's in really good shape, and he always just has these like gems of wisdom he just throws out like they're nothing. And it surprises me every time I hear him say something like that. But I was doing something difficult. We were trying to lift a weight, and I'm new to this whole kind of type of weight training. And I said, "This is hard." And he just stopped and he looked at me and he said, "I suspect you've experienced hard things in your life, and this is not one of them." He says, "This is challenging." And then he just went right back to what we were doing. And so I realized, we have to be very cautious about how we use the word hard. I suspect many of you have experienced actually hard things in your life. Trying to train yourself to sit down and meditate is not one of them. It might be challenging, but it is not hard. But if we start looking at life in that way, we become receptive to the realization of eternal life, right? This is important. I'll go a little bit further. How are we on time? Yeah, we'll go a little bit further, and then we'll have some questions. That which is non-existent does not come into manifestation. That which truly exists never ceases to be. Seers know this to be true. No, the life that pervades the universe is indestructible. No one can change it or cause it to be non-existent. Bodies inhabited by the eternal, indestructible, immeasurable, embodied self come to an end. Therefore, engage in righteous endeavor. Those who think the self, the true essence can slay or be slain, fail to discern the truth. No one slays or is slain. This is heavy stuff. But like we've been discussing, the purpose of our meditation is to what? Identify ourselves with that eternal, timeless, unchanging being within. That's why I encourage you to contemplate in the ways that we've discussed already. Seers know this to be true, that which is non-existent does not come into manifestation, and that which truly exists never ceases to be. The life that pervades the universe is indestructible. Bodies, physical reality, inhabited by the internal, indestructible, immeasurable, embodied self. Bodies come to an end. Matter comes to an end. Relationships come to an end. Your money comes to an end. It also comes back. Everything comes and it goes. But what is being described here is anything that you can perceive, see, feel, touch, experience, it's going to come to an end. If you can get your mind around that, then you're going to be a lot happier. And if you can get your mind around that and still live your life as though it's important, then you're going to make the most of this life. It's not saying, this is not to be a nihilistic statement to where you just give up and say, what's it matter? It's just telling you the reality of the situation. Just like every year, there's a rose that blooms on the side of the house. It's beautiful. I love that little rose. I mean, it's all scrawny and it makes this like real pinkish orange rose. I think it's really great. But I know that rose isn't going to last forever. But I do know that it's probably going to come back next year, right? So this is a direct call to learning how to exist in life without attachment. But it's not nihilistic. It's not telling you not to try. I know my life is finite. I know that right now, people are interested in my podcasts and my books and it's benefiting them. But I know pretty much in 150 years from now, Ryan, who? Right? But that's not because, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try to do what is important for right now, for the people that I meant to be here to serve right now. And I do my best to do it, right? If I found this to be nihilistic, I'd say, well, what's the point? I'm just going to sit here and not say anything to anybody. The same thing when I play music. Music is a beautiful thing for me because it really brings this home, because music doesn't last forever. If you were listening to a note that just never stopped, would that be music? It's music because you hear the change, the rise and the fall. The song is going to last for a little while. Now, I do tend to like longer songs because I really don't like it when things come to an end. But it is a lesson in observing this rise and fall of life. Dancing is another one. Do you dance to get from point A to point B? If I was going to dance, I'm not really a dancer, but just the idea is here. If I'm dancing, am I doing it to start here and get to the door? No, that's not why you dance. You dance to be in the moment, to be in the flow with your partner or yourself and so on. And that's why life, Maya, the divine play, Leela, is said to be like a dance. And so we have to find a way to be engaged in life, give it our very best, but be willing to recognize that it's not going to last forever. And when you can do that, then you become free. There was one teacher, I forget who it was, but he was asked, what is the secret to his enlightenment or something like that? And the response was, I don't mind what happens. Now, that didn't mean that he was just giving up and not doing anything. He just meant that he was participating and he did his best. And if it worked, great. If it didn't, so what? So this is a very different way of existing compared to everyone else in the world. But this is the way the yogi exists in life. Now, let's continue a little bit. The true self is never born, nor does it die at any time, nor having once come to be will it cease to be. The true self is unborn, permanent, and ageless. It does not die when the body dies. One who knows that the true self is indestructible and eternal, uncreated and unchanging, how can one possessed of this understanding kill anyone? Whom can he kill? Now, the question sort of came up yesterday, like where does self-inquiry and Ramana Maharshi's approach fit into Kriya Yoga? Well, let's read that again. The true self is never born, nor does it die at any time, nor having once come to be will it cease to be. The true self is unborn, permanent, and ageless. It does not die when the body dies. One who knows that the true self is indestructible and eternal, uncreated and unchanging, how can one possessed of this understanding kill anyone? Whom can he kill? Well, if you read this clearly and you want to be free, what do you have to figure out? You have to figure out what is the true self? What is being indicated here? And that's where vichara and self-inquiry come into play, because it's through that practice that you get the direct experience of what the true self actually is. And then when you get that kind of experience, non-attachment becomes easy. Remember, I talked about yesterday my musical instruments, how I was like really attached to them when I was younger. But as I got older, I realized I can replace them if something goes wrong. And partially it's because I moved back into a space of knowing, recognizing that my being was not defined by the musical instruments that I had. I knew that what was important was me as the musician, right? So in this process, what is important is you as the seer, as the eternal self. And the more you figure that out, non-attachment becomes something that is just natural, not forced. And then you understand how to do it without stressing yourself out. And that's really the goal of this. Now, let's see. I want to get up to 37 here. All right. Just as a person casts off worn out garments and later acquires new ones, so after casting away worn out bodies, the true self acquires new ones as needed. Weapons do not harm the true self. Fire does not burn it. Water does not wet it, nor does the wind cause it to dry and wither. The true self cannot be harmed. It is eternal, all-pervading, stable, unmoving, and primeval. The true self is unmanifest, cannot be defined by the mind, and is unchanging. Knowing this, you should not mourn. Even if you think that the true self is perpetually born or eternally dies, you should not mourn. For that which is born, death is certain, and certain is birth for that which dies. Therefore, for what is unavoidable, you should not grieve. Creatures and human beings are at first unmanifest, manifest, when they appear in form, and are unmanifest at the end of their term of manifestation. Why should this be the cause for discontent? Now, we'll go a little further. this probably, me saying this to you, probably actually seems obvious, maybe. You probably hear it and you know it's true. Like it's obvious as a bit of wisdom. But your goal or mission is to take it from a mental idea that you know is true to figuring out how can you make it real in your life experience. And I do want to be cautious in that when it says things like you should not grieve and so on, that doesn't mean that when something happens, you don't feel loss, that you don't cry, that you don't weep, because that is natural. Being in a human body, having energetic connections with others, when that passes, it is natural to have a sense of disconnect and a purging from that. What this is describing is you don't define yourself by it. You know, you don't go through a situation and then have the stages of grief and then you live the rest of your life directly always pointing back to that. And that's something that I did and I've wrestled with. You know, when my wife Melissa died, I struggled with that because that was a very big deal in my life. And I wanted people to know what I went through. And I realized eventually that I mourned her, certainly, but I was now defining my existence through that experience. And by defining my existence through that experience, I was not being able to be present for the people who are in my life now that are important, just as important to me now, right? And I can remember an experience I had after she passed, because she was a Kriya Yogi, a student of Roy's. I was meditating, kind of like, you know, I had a sense of connection with her, and I was upset, and I was hearing the Om vibration, and in my mind, it was as if this message came, and it said, "Stand up for me." And that was the only words that came through, but I knew what it meant, and it was as if it was a message kind of from Melissa's being. And what it was saying to me was this, like, I am fine. Don't grieve. I am part of this infinite consciousness. My body isn't here anymore. My personality isn't here anymore, but stand up for me. Don't live in a state of mourning all the time. Recognize that I've lived my life and I am part of this infinite consciousness. And the standing up for me is kind of like acknowledging that that's the way it is, so that other people who go through difficult experiences can see that it is okay to honor and acknowledge things that have passed, but to continue to live your life right now in the present moment, right? So, you know, I didn't understand this portion of the Gita until I went through that experience. So I'm telling you that so you recognize there might be things that you don't actually get until you go through a life experience, and then you'll look back at the Gita and say, oh, now I understand. And to that end, I tell you that so you recognize that when things happen in your life, sometimes they're there to help you understand deeper principles. You might not like it, but that's oftentimes why they're there. And if you can embrace that, then you move closer to a state of actual real freedom, right? So when it says things like do not mourn, I don't mean to be like me when I was in my early 20s and, you know, someone dies and I say, why should you mourn? You know, we never die. Like, that is inappropriate. That is not helpful to anyone. You are appropriate to the moment, but internally, you know what's really going on. Now, the final bit I wanted to get at before we take questions and then a quick break is this part of the Gita that took me a while to kind of figure out what was being said here. So Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, and he says, knowing now the duty before you. So knowing now the duty before you, essentially what he's saying is, I have told you what is accurate and true. So the duty before you is to contemplate those principles which I have just shared and make them real for you. That is the duty of a Kriya Yogi. However you do that, that's your duty. You should not hesitate. Indeed, there is no higher good for a warrior spirit than righteous endeavor performed as duty. Happy are such devotees to whom such a fortunate endeavor is presented as an open entrance to spiritual fulfillment. So Krishna has just pointed out, and this is applicable to every single one of you, by having an interest in Kriya Yoga, by being here today, by wanting to meditate, You have been presented with an open entrance to spiritual fulfillment. There is no one else, well, aside from the folks who are helping run the show here and one person who just moved from Asheville, there is no one else here from Asheville who has had this presented to them right now. There's a whole bunch of people in this town, but only you who have traveled from all kinds of different states are here now having this presented to you. And then, of course, the people who are here to help, it's presented to you too. So it's pointing out that by having an interest, even if you don't feel like you're going to do a good job, this is your duty. Now, if you will not undertake this righteous endeavor and thereby avoid your own duty, you shall incur misfortune. Also, people who know you will talk about your weakness. And for one such as you who have been held in high esteem, disgrace is worse than death. Great warriors will think that you have abstained from your duty because of fear, and those by whom you were esteemed will consider you to be superficial. Unkind words and slander will be uttered by your foes. Could anything be more grievous than that? If you are slain, you shall attain spiritual fulfillment. If you are victorious, you will enjoy life in the world. Therefore, stand up, resolve to do your duty. So I always kind of wondered what this is about, because I thought, well, if these are heroes and we're talking about spiritual heroes, surely they're not going to look at us and slander us, right? Because that's not what they do. So you've been presented with this opportunity. It doesn't mean that you're not going to take it. Now I'm going to talk about you behind your back, because you didn't engage in the process. We have to remember that the Bhagavad Gita is about our internal states. So the righteous qualities, that's you. The unrighteous qualities, that's you. Arjuna, that's you. Krishna, that's you. Everything in this book is you. So what this means is when you've been presented with this opportunity to grow, and you know it, but you decide not to do it, there will always be something in the back of your mind feeling like you have failed. Like something was given to you and you just decided to waste it. So it's about you having issues, internal conflict with yourself because you didn't take the opportunity, right? So basically, do your Kriya yoga. That's what it comes down to. There was one more thing here that I wanted to mention about that. What was it? Oh, right. If you are slain, you shall attain spiritual fulfillment. If you are victorious, you will enjoy life in the world. Therefore, stand up resolved to do your duty. Any effort you make to this end, even if you don't make it to understanding what Yogananda understood, if you continue forward through the duration of your life, when you're done, you're done. You will be free if you have maintained that momentum. Because remember when we were in meditation and you started some momentum with that chant, and then you found that chant continued even without you trying? Well, your life is like that chant. So if you're using your life to move in the momentum of spiritual freedom and your life ends, well, your physical life, your body ends, well, that consciousness of you still continues based on the momentum you've generated in this life. That's why don't worry about it. Just do it. One of Yogananda's students, I forget her name, but she was with him for a really long time, and she was a nun at Self-Realization Fellowship. She was dying, and she wanted to see Yogananda before she passed, and he came to her, and she was concerned. She'd been a nun and practiced meditation and been of service to Yogananda almost her entire life, and she was afraid she had failed. And Yogananda came in, and he basically said, don't worry about it. He said, just remain established in God as you know God, and then when you pass, you'll be free, right? So even someone like that who has dedicated their life had some doubts and had some insecurities, and that's normal. We'll all have those. But because that momentum was there, Yogananda knew she was going to be fine, because the moment she dropped her body, she's immediately dropping those insecurities, and it's just going to be like, oh, he was right, So that's why once the opportunity is presented to you, you keep moving forward. And that's what the idea of is it an apostate? So it's like when someone abandons their religion, Like if you're a monk or in the Christian tradition and you quit being a Christian, you're labeled as an apostate and you're kind of exiled and cast out. Well, that's not quite what it's supposed to be like. That's just like an analogy for what happens when you don't do your duty. You become lost in a way. So once it's presented to you, you continue. And then, if you are slain, you shall attain spiritual fulfillment. If you are victorious, you will enjoy life in the world. One of the other things my gym guru said to me, when I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do something, he said, well, he says, if you succeed, you'll be happy. If you fail, you'll be wise. So, it's applicable to the Gita here. Now, I do want to take a break here in just a minute, but I want to see if there are any questions based on what we've covered. Knowing this is dense stuff, it is something you have to contemplate on your own to figure out, but if I can help clarify, I will. So any questions in the room, then we'll look at Zoom. Just raise your hand if you got one. No? Someone's got to have one. No? It was clear? Made sense? Didn't make sense? Make a little bit of sense? It takes time. And, going back to when we talked about contemplation, when you read the Gita or the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, or if you're with a teacher that you trust, like you pretty much feel like they're on the up and up, and they say something that you don't really understand, avoid feeling like you're dumb. Like, don't feel like I just can't get that. If you hear something or you read something that you just don't grasp, don't say that's beyond me. Look at it, acknowledge at this point in time, you don't get it, but acknowledge and feel like, but I can. I'll always have that sense like, I do have the capacity to get this. And it might not come immediately. It might take a year and a half or 2 years or 10 years or 20 years. But if you maintain that feeling like, I can understand this, it's on the tip of your tongue, that kind of feeling, that will allow you to develop the capacity to understand it. That will allow you to develop discernment in that regard. Roy told a story one time when he was at SRF and Yogananda was giving a talk, and Yogananda was saying, some of you will be supremely free souls in this lifetime, and some of you will be free souls, after you pass. And he was going on and on, and he could see people looking around, and one person's like, you think he's talking about me? And Roy said, don't be like that. He says, know that he's talking about you. He says, feel like if someone says like, I see free souls here and so on, don't think, is it me? Like, say, it is absolutely me. I don't know how, but I know it's going to be me. And in that way, that will help inspire you. And Roy talked like that. He said, even when he was younger, he would say, if only one other person in the world could experience enlightenment, he knew he could. He said, even if no one else in the world could experience it, he knew that it was an accessible thing. And he wasn't saying that from an egotistical standpoint. He was just saying it as, it is absolutely possible to figure this out because the way has been made by other people, And I think it's really important for you to think that way. And if other people around you act like that, don't look at them and say, oh, who do they think they are? Be happy for them. I mean, they might be egotistical, but still be happy for them, because you need a little bit of confidence in order to make good choices that support that process.